What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast, episode 41. You are more valuable than you think. I'm Randy with my buddy Danny. What's up, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
So, today we are talking about you are more valuable than you think. I think there's kind of a oppressive culture that we live in the West where oftentimes our value is associated with our productivity, our job title, how sexy we are, whatever it may be. And a lot of people feel not too valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, right? Because, that whole idea of a meritocracy, like we're, taught that, you have to keep being productive. You have to prove yourself. You have to show your worth. And, people go through school, try to get good grades, they get degrees, they do all this stuff. And it's like you're constantly focused on doing more, right? Because if you do more, you are worth more. You validate yourself in the world. And I feel like, that's got to be, it's got to be damaging for people, I think. Because I know I've struggled with it myself at times.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. It is interesting though, because you look at it the other way, how if it didn't exist, would we even have any urge to do anything? Like if we didn't feel like we needed to be that, because I mean, there is this insane drive that we get from having to prove ourselves. A lot of the improvement in the world is due to this greed or this desire or dissatisfaction. If we were just totally satisfied, would we even do anything?
Yeah, that's a good point that you brought that up. When I was thinking about it, I had heard it was on the radio, but they were talking about productivity, right? And they were like talking about how how damaging it is, how dangerous. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, if that's all you're focused on. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, could we even live without it? I think it seems kind of like human beings, at least for me, and I think a lot of people, right? Like we prove ourselves by doing things in the world. We prove what we're capable of. We prove our skill levels by actually doing stuff, right? I think it was Marx said in his young writings, right, that effectively whatever powers we have, they're only realized in the world, right? So we only know what we can do once we do it. I don't know if I can build a table until I build a table, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you
Before that, I have
only
no idea. It's just theoretical. Yeah.
discover your gifts when they're challenged. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's
So
some
okay, yeah,
and
go
I
ahead.
mean it's something that I struggle with on a daily basis because on one hand I accomplish amazing things, but on the other hand I think I'm not good enough. And so I have to accomplish more. And however, I also have incorporated a regular practice of reminding myself regularly that I'm better than I think I am. Because I think that's the catch. See, it's not how valuable we actually are, it's how valuable we think we are. And I think there's a huge difference because most people don't really notice how valuable they are. They just notice how valuable they feel. And especially now with COVID and people out of work and all this type of stuff, people feel less valuable. But the thing is, their value is immeasurable. But there are certain things you can kind of look at to determine your value. But it's kind of finding the difference between what you feel and what is actually true.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that too, right? Because obviously all values are tied to whatever we think, right? I mean, however I decide to value things, it'll be valued that way, and they can be valuable to me to that extent. So on the one hand, yeah, right. It's just a matter of how we look at ourselves and how we view ourselves. That's where our value stems from. But I think it's also easy to sort of focus on the outside, external, and imagine that there is this. Because I think a lot of people, when we get caught up in this productivity idea of value, right? You're measuring yourself in that way. You act as if there's an objective standard for value. You act as if value exists outside of you, and you need to prove your worth or validate yourself that way. And I think that is the problem, right? Because it's like looking on social media and seeing people with a huge house or really sexy or whatever, and you're like, oh, and it's like that seems in a way almost objective. You think almost anybody that would look at this see that. And so I think that's part of the problem maybe is that it tricks us into forgetting or distracting ourselves from the fact that we create the value. It's not really existing in the world.
Yeah, and it's like a trick of our mind because our mind is very good at picking up on what's not there. Whereas it's something that we actively have to do to figure out what is there. So like my mind on autopilot, it's like a spell checker or something like that. It automatically picks out the things that aren't there, aren't there, aren't there. But it's something that I actively have to do. I have to be like, oh, that's that guitar I wanted. Oh, that's that computer I wanted. Oh, there's that Nintendo Switch I wanted. And I have all of that. It's like this stuff is surrounding me all the time, but it takes active practice to recognize that stuff. And it's the same thing with seeing value and that we are valuable. It's like, granted, I could pick my mind on autopilot, will pick out the things that I'm lacking and things that I'm not great in. But it takes practice to say, hey, I did this and I'm good at that. And I'm doing better than I've done before at this. And you know what? Compared with 97% of the world, I'm pretty excellent in this. So it's like actively looking at those things to help determine our value.
No, I think that's a good point, right? It's like you have to train yourself almost to do it, because otherwise, you miss it. It's almost like your brain just kind of looks at all the things lacking, all the disappointments, and focuses on, what needs to be changed rather than what's good now. And I think that's so if we're talking about, we're more valuable, or you're more valuable than you think, the issue then is obviously with how we're thinking should be part of it, I would imagine, right? And I think part of that too is living in the sort of type of culture and world that we do that sort of puts a lot of emphasis on external things like, object possession, things like that as a sign of value. So what do you think that people can do to kind of start learning to put that into practice, to think the right way or to see their value for what they're really worth?
Yeah, I think you really have to work on gratitude and just like observing the things that you have. And it's, there was this TED talk, I think, called Hardwired Happiness. Maybe it wasn't a TED talk, maybe it was just a normal
There's so
video.
many TED Talks
Okay.
anymore, dude.
This was
There's
like
like a
this was an
billion.
old one from like long time ago called Hardwire Happiness by Sri Rao Kumar, something like that. And basically he was talking about how like, you know, everything that you have now, at one point you wanted it, you were lacking it. And it's like the thing is we totally lose perspective of all the things that we have. And so it's really that stuff in life, seeing that value. Like look at there's this story in Norman Vincent Peale's Power of Positive Thinking where some dude lost his job, he thought his life was over, and he's like, okay, well, do you have your integrity? And the guy's like, yeah, I feel like I have my integrity. Okay, we'll put that one down. How about your wife? Oh yeah, she'd never leave me, she's great. Okay, great. How about family? Yeah, my children, they support me, they say we'll be with you no matter what. Okay, so you got children too. How about good standing in community? And like you go through these things and you see that it's it's not the being a complete success, it's not the notoriety or the money. It's, you know, I'm valuable to this person. Like I know, back when my grandmother was alive, I derived such great value from being able to go over to her house once a week and spend time with her because I know I made that a difference in her life. And also it made a difference in my life because I was able to help improve her life. And that was something that like I know I'm valuable because I'm making a difference in someone else's life. And I think a lot of it is taking a look around you and seeing what people's lives you can make a difference in, even so much as a smile.
Yeah, I like that. The emphasis on relationships and like so seeing your worth in a sense through your connection to others. And also the idea too, I mean, you seem to be suggesting like the idea like, we need like a balance. I think a lot of times when we struggle with this, we're really like when we struggle with questions about our own value, we're really focused on like one thing. Like, and it's oftentimes like success or money or something like that that we're really focused on as a sign of our self-worth. But we're forgetting all those other things in life that one make our life quality and good, but also that makes it valuable. And I think it's easy to forget. I think it can even become a distraction, and when you focus on one thing, you like things fall apart. And I mean, I like that example too, because a lot of times I think when we really struggle with this question, we're probably struggling with other things. it's usually like, depression and stuff like that that causes us to really think that way. And you have to start, asking yourself, well, what is valuable in life? What do I have now? Do I have my, even if it's something simple, like, I'm still breathing, right? I'm still here. And so there still is time to do things. There's still times to change. So I think this is the challenge. It's like finding that balance and finding out then, how do we start determining and really seeing these values for what they are? Because I think, like you said, gratitude's a good one, trying to pay attention to, what we do have and being grateful for it, being thankful for it. I think, setting time seems to help as well to appreciate those things that are in our life. So making sure that we're not just, working 20 hours a day and we're doing stuff with people that matter. I think that's helpful. Yeah, it's a
I
tough one
also
though.
think taking a different look at it, because trying to determine your value from like a financial metric is a terrible metric. It's one of the most easily measured ones, but it's a terrible metric because it doesn't do anything. Like I remember there was this guy I watched on YouTube for years, and I finally just one day out of and he was a multimillionaire. And just like one day by random chance, I was walking around Dallas and I ran into him. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's it like to be a millionaire? What's it feel like to be a millionaire? And he's like, it feels the same as it did before. And that like blew my mind. Because we have all these fantasies that like, oh, as soon as you're a millionaire, then it's just like, oh, all of the life's problems go away. But it's not true. It's just like that's the fantasy. And so you have to find something else to derive your value from. And I think one really helpful thing, because it's something that everyone can do from where they are right now. And and the easiest way to do that is just to ask, how is the world better because I'm here?
Hmm.
You know? And it may be something as simple as I water the plant on my kitchen table. And if I didn't do that, it would die. Or I feed this dog. And if I didn't do that, the dog would die. Or maybe it could be a lot more profound. Like maybe you are that one person who helps someone out and nobody else is willing to help them. Or maybe you contribute, maybe you have a big business and you help support thousands of families. Or, whatever it is that you're doing, it's very crucial to recognize the difference that you're making in the world.
Yeah, shift that focus away from, it's funny though, because, I think we often look at things that are easy to measure, right? Like you said, like money and stuff is just one, I think we're trained to think in terms of it, right? Cost benefit kind of analysis. We tend to think that way. It's also easily measurable, but I think that's the problem too, is like, I think individual value is not easily measured. And that's just it, because it's something that is very complex and has to take into account a lot of different factors. And we tend to miss that quite often when we're doing it ourselves. We're looking at really arbitrary things that really don't matter, like getting a certain degree or earning a certain amount. It's like that doesn't mean your life is good. I think that's the misconception. When we talk about value and the individual's value, it's you have the power to create your life, to be whatever you want. You have the power to make a difference, to be part of the world, and to be really, connected to a lot of people and valued in that way. And I think it's difficult to see that though a lot of times. And that's really where people struggle. We struggle with all these types of things because we're so used to dealing with, you know, um, the quick assessment, if you know what I mean, like really making fast determinations about value, making quick judgments. And I think slowing down can be a big help in that way too, to really think clearly and see, why am I making this judgment? What am I basing it on? And is it really like a limited perspective? Am I being very narrow in my thinking, or am I trying to account for like everything? That's where it gets
Yeah.
difficult. I think, it comes down to two, having, an idea of, what matters to you in life, what makes your life quality or of high value. And that's a difficult question too, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. I like what you said there with kind of slowing down and stopping, because I think that is really important. Um, there's that saying, all a man's problems come from his inability to sit still and do nothing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we wind ourselves up because we think we have to do so much and be so much. And like when you and I started this podcast, we just I mean, honestly, we just want to spend more time together.
Yeah, it's
And yeah, and we enjoyed spending time together. But we looked at it and we're like, hey, if we can help out one person, literally just one person, that would make it so worthwhile. And even if we can't do that, just because we get to spend time together and talk and it helps out
yeah,
with our own difficulties, that's so worthwhile. So it's kind of like you have to just kind of slow down and maybe stop trying to do so much. Like I would even say, yeah, if you feel like you're not very valuable right now, I would say do maybe even do less. Stop.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point too, right? Because when we, especially when we kind of get caught in that cycle, we're pushing ourselves. We start to get really, we start to, I think a lot of times we start to feel negative and then distract ourselves through being more active rather than the opposite approach, which would be to slow down, do less, and actually kind of take an assessment. But see, this is the hard thing, right? Because most of us too also think like if we stop, we die, right? If we stop, everything ends. I won't be able to afford anything. It'll fall apart. I won't get the promotion. And it's like, but if you stop and you give yourself a chance to think, you can also kind of start making real decisions. Like maybe you're not happy in what you're doing. Maybe that's not the right course of, maybe that's not the right career choice for you or whatever. And, it's funny, I think, but we make it seem so hard to do that. And it's like, I mean, even with like the whole lockdown thing, right? Like so many people I talk to were just like watching TV all the time and stuff. And it's like, well, you have all this time to at least set some aside for doing stuff that's going to help, right? And benefit you and make things better or improve. But that's a difficult thing, it's like taking that time, even slowing down enough to even look at ourselves. A lot of us are afraid to do that, I think. A lot of people are afraid to really look inside,
Well, because
you
then you
know?
have to confront everything. But
Yeah.
yeah. But like with that idea of slowing down. So like here's the thing. We think we have to we don't feel valuable. We think we have to prove our value. And so like we're putting all this stuff out there in a lacking or a wanting sense. Whereas instead of if we stop and we start recognizing our value, and no matter where you are, I guarantee you have value. And I think I was just thinking
Yeah.
of what would be such a good exercise because I read this book Goals by Brian Tracy, and or maybe it was an audio program. He was saying write
Yeah.
down 100 goals, and then
Oh,
before
yeah, I
you know
remember
it,
that. Yeah.
yeah, before you know it, you'll start accomplishing them. So I would challenge anyone, and I think I'm going to do that this weekend, is write down 100 things that prove that you're valuable, or 100 reasons you're
Oh,
valuable. You
that's a
know,
good idea. Yeah.
because we never take the time to do that. We're our mind will constantly think of all these things that I'm not good enough, I don't have enough, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, and I'm not where I thought it would be. But we don't take enough time to actually put in the positive thoughts. And
Yeah.
so
I mean,
it's
when do people, oh,
yeah,
go ahead. Yeah. I
it's
was going
like
to say,
that
when do people ever stop?
yeah, it's that garbage in, garbage out theory that I
Yeah.
have. Like I think our brains are just like computers. We put garbage in, we're going to get garbage out. So if we put more positive stuff in, we're going to get a lot more positive stuff out.
No, I think it's a great point. It's funny. I was just thinking too, it's like I always wondered, like we're so good at seeing what we're lacking, right? What we're missing, what we need. And I always wondered if that's like like maybe like an evolutionary type thing from like back in the day, like, oh God, like, we would die if we don't have enough food for, we know the rain's coming or whatever, right? The season's changing. You need to have stuff supplied and stocked up. And so there's this like you're looking around and you're seeing, oh God, I don't have enough of that. I gotta go get that because we won't make it through, this time period or whatever. But now that's not the problem. So instead we're looking around and we're like, oh, I don't have a Lexus, or I don't have a Porsche or whatever, and blah, and I don't have this. It's like, well, yeah, okay, maybe you don't, but those things are not the same type of it's not your basic survival that's at issue or at stake, right? But that mechanism, and I think that's one of the interesting things about humans is we've changed our world so much, but all those mechanisms for survival and for living are still present. And I think a lot of times they do mess us up.
Okay, so I'm rereading this book called Factfulness because it's such a good book on getting a positive perspective that the world is getting better. Like undoubtedly, the world is getting better. It's proven factually the world is getting better. But like, case in point, we have the same exact body makeup for the past 10,000 years, maybe even more than that. However, in the past 100 years, that's 2 orders of magnitude less than that, our life expectancy has doubled in the past 100 years.
Yeah.
We went from
Yeah.
like 30 years to 70 plus years across the world. And however, we have the same exact body, the same exact makeup that we've had for 10,000 years. So it's, I think it is evolutionary. We were bred to figure out what's missing, because that kept us alive. But nowadays, life is, for many people, life is kind of just a given. So now we have to harness the powers that we have to actually remind ourselves we're valuable.
Well, yeah, and it's funny too, like, if you look back in history, right? The other thing I think is really interesting about this is, like, when you look back at, like, ancient philosophers and thinkers, there were always people that usually, not always, but a lot of times they had either means, oftentimes, or, basically they had some way to support themselves, or they were willing to be impoverished, right? Because you need time to think. It's like, sort of like, that ability to sort of work through those types of problems, it requires free time. It requires time not to spend on survival. I think what's interesting is, for most of our history, we were so caught up in survival and all the stuff needed for that you're kind of distracted from other things, from thinking and reflecting and worrying about stuff. Now it's like everybody's got time to do that. So it's like, oh God, now I have to deal with this. And it's like you run around trying to sort of, distract yourself from really looking at it. But I think it's a lot better when you just take a step back and look at it and deal with it, because then, one, you can start figuring out what you really want, what's good for you. You can see your value in the world. You can start making those right connections. And I think, for a lot of us too, we think we want things because we see other people have them and stuff, but in reality, they're not even things we actually want. It's like a disconnect between, like, what we really want in our lives and things that we need and that we would really value, and what we see other people have and we think we should have to validate ourselves. And those are two different things. It's like, and I think it's interesting because we all struggle with this sort of difficulty of making sense of, who we are in the world and understanding ourselves in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and most of the times getting those things, we want them because we think it would change our state. Like, we think if we get that, we would be satisfied. That's an experiment that I try and do every so, like, I talked previously in the episodes about how I kind of bookend my days, how, like, during the day, I don't really know what's going to happen, but in the morning and at night, I can predict and I can make myself do stuff. So, like, in the morning, one of the things that I do is journaling. And part of that journaling is reminding like, I have it written there, you're more valuable than you think you are, or something along those lines. But also, there was something else. What were we just talking about?
I don't know. You're talking about your book ending, journaling. I like that idea, though. And, I think, well, with that, though, I think journaling is, like, they've shown that time and time again how powerful it is actually for, actually both working through problems and also just actually being able to, like, it helps us slow down and actually look at it because you're writing it down. So you're thinking about it, you're putting it on paper, you're doing something permanent essentially with it, or putting it out in the world, right? I think it's a great idea, is one, like, you can remind yourself actually through journaling, right? That you're more valuable than you think, but you can also start working through some of the things that really do define your value. Like, what am I doing today that's important, that's valuable? Who am I seeing? What relationships really matter? You can work through these sorts of questions on paper, and it has a lot more power doing it that way, I think, than just sort of, because if you just think about it, you can get distracted easily. Other things come up. It's a lot different writing it down. And I know that because I've journaled, ever since I was really young. I've always done it. And I find it hugely valuable. It's also a good way to work through problems in general, because you can kind of just, slowly do it.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that just came back to me was, I'm working on being contented now. So, like, I know we talk a whole bunch about goals, and, like, I'm very goal oriented, and I think it's very important to write down goals, and I do that every day. But and I do it with a time when I expect to achieve that goal. But also, one thing that I write down every day is I am peaceful, contented, and fulfilled today. And so like that's one thing that every morning I work to achieve, because it takes me out of this mindless scramble to get more, to be more, to do something else, and reminds me that wherever I am, whatever I have, I can be peaceful, contented, and fulfilled.
Well, I think that's the thing that most of us struggle with, right? Is that normally it's like you get caught up in this, you get caught up in the day to day, you get caught up in trying to make more, to have more, to better your circumstances. And it's easy to sort of lose yourself, get distracted in that, and focus on that as if that's all that matters. We talked about this before, right? Where, looking at ends as if, we get a goal or we get some achievement, like we're going to be happy then, right? Like that's going to change everything, just having it. Like, oh, I'm a vet now, like you always said, right? Or oh, I finally got that degree or whatever. It doesn't actually change anything though, because you're still the same person, right? And I think part of it too is recognizing that, you don't actually need more, that you have what you need now, that things are good now. Starting to really pay attention to that really does make everything else more valuable, because then you're adding on to it. You're not constantly in the negative. You're building rather than sort of trying to chase, I guess.
It's like that saying, wherever you go, there you are. We always think that the
Yeah.
grass is greener when we get somewhere else, then it'll be different, but you'll just be somewhere else with the same person. And yeah.
The same shitty person now. Isn't it funny that that's like, we do trick ourselves though into thinking that way all the time, even with, whether it's even with self-worth, like, oh, yeah, I'll validate myself when I get that promotion or this or that. And it's like, why would that fundamentally change anything? Like, it might improve your circumstances a little, but I mean, it might not also. If it means more hours or whatever, or more stress, maybe it's not making you better. Maybe it's making you worse. And I think it's this confusion of, the metric for self-value, right, is really the difficulty.
I've always liked flip-flopping the if-then fallacy. So like the whole idea, like, or when I get this, then I'll be happy, or when I do this, then I'll be happy. I always like flip-flopping that to when I'm happy, then I'll do this. When I'm So like, for instance, I thought for a long time that like when I was a veterinarian, I would be happy. And so like I went and I did all this work. I became a veterinarian, and then I realized I didn't like that profession. So it didn't work. So
Oops.
nowadays, yeah, oops. So like nowadays, I'm like, ooh, when I'm a really good computer programmer, then I'll be happy. I switch that around. I'm like, okay, when I'm happy, then I'll be a really good computer programmer. So let me focus on being happy, and let me every day take the actions to be a really good computer programmer. And so like that way I can have the goal that I wanted anyways, being happy, but I can have it the whole time instead of just at the end.
Yeah, it's funny, I think it's all too just about our perspective and how we're thinking about things. It's really I think that's why it's so difficult too, so often, is that it's so easy to just to it's so easy to take the wrong perspective, to get caught up in looking at it the wrong way, that you just sort of forget how to do it the right way, or don't ever know. And I think that's why, like stepping back or looking at things differently, like you said, trying to flip the perspective, trying to flip your thinking so that you do see it from a new light, and you start to kind of maybe incorporate that into your evaluation. And it starts to make it a lot easier to see our worth and our value. Because the truth is, I mean, I think everyone, just insofar as human beings are just potential, right? I mean, it's all possibility. So there alone, we have value just in that sense. And you also have time. If you're alive, you're breathing, you have time. That's something awesome. You're also, not dead, which is good. And you're here. So I mean, there's always something you can do with it. And I think that's what we forget, is like that potential that we are, the sort of possibility that we are, is valuable in itself, because that's how everything is done in our world, right? It's done by individuals doing stuff. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You made some really good points just right there. So like, just being alive, 99.9% of the people who have ever lived are dead. You're valuable. You were somehow that lucky sperm and egg that became a person. You're valuable. It's like
yeah.
all of these things that are just like okay, for instance, in this book, Factfulness, basically like 100 plus years ago, most of the population was at what we would consider the poverty level, like
Yeah.
barely having enough food to survive, many times going to sleep hungry. Like, just that, I would guess that most people listening to this podcast can probably maybe even order food to their house. Like,
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about how awesome that is. And, what a great thing it is to be able to live in these times. So it really comes down to noticing these things, and actually, it really is noticing them and experiencing that. So, like, um, I they always talk. I did a whole bunch of like these tantra things for a while, and they always talk about, like, everybody wants to improve their sex life, so they get all these toys and they get all these
Yeah.
like crazy new positions, but it's really not that at all. It's really just becoming more sensitive to
Yeah.
actually what's happening in the present. So it comes down to focusing and observing what's happening in the present and being more sensitive to that stuff. And so noticing your value is really becoming more sensitive to your value. And you do that by actually recognizing where you're valuable.
I like that too, because I think that's so true for almost everything we struggle with, right? It's really like about not being distracted, being more sensitive, being actually focused on something too, because it's so easy not to focus on stuff. And I think, like what you said there too, like when we're looking at things like acquisition of objects, goals, things like that, if we're putting our value in those things, we're making a fundamental error about value. We're assuming that something gives us value rather than us giving it value. I mean, it was was it Protagoras that said, man is the measure of all things, of things that are that they are, of things that are not that they're not, right? Like, we pretty much are the determiners of all things. The world is a construct of our making. It's the human world we live in, right? So value is something we create. It's not something that is granted to us by an object or by a goal that we achieve or anything like that. It's our thinking that makes that so. And I think once you see that, you can start correcting, but it's easy to get lost in that, because it's easier sometimes to rely on what we perceive to be real objective things, right? That can sort of bestow value or make value. Whereas, we're missing the real truth of it that we created. So anything can be. I mean, it's why people value different lifestyles, right? Not everybody wants to be. I mean, I think we mentioned this, I think last time, but I said, like, I wouldn't want to ever be Elon Musk or something. I think that, to me, that would be a terrible life. None of that would be, I mean, the money's whatever, but even that, to a certain point, it's just not the life that I would want. And I think when you look at it that way, you start to see that, well, it's really our perception that puts the value in things or makes it. And, we can then assert our own value because we're the creators of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you made so many good points. The one thing that you said is recognizing the fallacy in our thinking, and that is really helpful. Because it's like, oftentimes it may just be like one or two thoughts that we have that I'm not valuable because I don't feel it, because this one thing, this one, like, I'm out of work right now because of COVID. I don't feel valuable. And this is like one of the worst things. I don't remember what book, but I read about it. Like, back in the Depression, like, people couldn't, like, they literally couldn't find jobs there, and they felt
Oh yeah. Yeah.
totally worthless. And it's like one of the worst feelings that you can feel. And
Oh yeah, it is.
and a lot of people are there right now because of COVID, and it's terrible. And my heart goes out to them. But it's like recognizing the fallacy in that thinking. Okay. So, like, equating having a job at this present moment right now, this one day out of the thousands
Yeah.
of days of your life, not having a job this one day out of the thousands of days of your life makes you not valuable. Like, recognizing the fallacy of that thinking, whereas you could change your focus. Like, some dude I knew used to say, hocus pocus, change your focus. And and so you could change your focus and say, I know that right now I feel not very valuable because I don't have a job, but I also know that this person, I make a big difference in their life. And that makes me valuable. So it's like changing your focus to get the result that you're looking for. I think that is the crucial skill to help people feel more valuable.
No, I think it really is, and it's a good point. And when we think that way too, when we're looking at, our self-worth is tied to like, whether I have a job right now or whether I get this thing or that thing, we're also forgetting that, we're focusing on what we lack, but we're not focusing also on what we have. Like you said, like either that I make a difference in this person's life, or that, I also have the capacity to start doing different things. So I could focus my energies on other things that might lead to something then else, like a job or something like that later in some different area. You never know. But I think always focusing on that lacking thing as the defining factor, it also is a way to, it also kind of gives us then that negative outlook that then can derail us and make us more miserable moving forward. And that's always the difficult thing there, right? Is keeping that perspective right. We're trained on the right things, even when we're struggling, even when we're facing difficulties.
Yeah.
That's
So
the hard part. Yeah.
so here's another example. I love this
Really.
saying, like, it doesn't matter where you were or where you are as much as where you want to be. So like the past and the present don't matter nearly as much as where you want to be in the future. And so like point in case, I told you that I'm working on studying a language as an adult, and like
Yeah.
I've been doing it for a month, and it's pretty intensive. It's 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it's pretty intensive. But like every day I struggle with this. Oh, I don't want to make a mistake because then people will think this of me, and then I won't be as valuable, And it's like, but I know deep down that like I need to put myself out there. I need to make those mistakes so I can learn from it. And so it's that thinking that like, even though right now things may not be great, even though I may make a mistake now, even though I may be out of work right now, even though whatever is going on right now, the place where you want to be, if that is better, if that is worthwhile, then whatever you're doing right now is worthwhile.
I like that thinking too. And it's funny, like, you mentioned like we do that so often, like with the class you're taking, right? You're paying for a class and you're afraid to make a mistake. That makes no sense when you think about it, right? It's like hilarious because like one, you're paying for this, it's a service to learn a language. And why would you not make a mistake? You don't know it, you're learning it, right? It's like this whole thing we get caught up in, and like having like imagining that like the camera's always on us or whatever, right? So we're always worried about how we look, about what we're doing. And it's like that's what kills us, because we don't then do anything. We don't try, we're afraid actually focus and put our whole selves in, which would make it that much better, and we would actually do really well if we weren't afraid of those things. And I think this is the difficulty though, because when we're caught up in that, when we do get caught up in like the establishing our value in the world based on externals, right? We worry about things like that because, if I make a mistake, then, I'm an idiot or whatever, or not, I'm not presenting myself as being intelligent or whatever. Like I should know this immediately, right? And I think that's a good way to look at it, because it does help. And the idea of focusing on, what you want, and that makes it all worthwhile, because that's really what matters. Yeah.
And also what you said there, the error in focusing on the externals. So we've talked about this before, and it's the idea of what's within your control and what's not within your control. And so like I'm such a big fan of rewarding yourself for taking the action, because the action is within your control. That's the only thing within your control, is the action. The results, they may come, they may not come, but you have absolutely no control over that. So like taking the action, doing it, persistence over and over again. Just take the action, reward yourself for taking the action, just take the action. And that's it. And eventually the reward will come, or maybe it won't. But whatever is going to happen will happen anyways.
You know what I love about that too, though, and that's a great point, which is like, take like, you could work your ass off. You could answer phone calls at midnight for a job. You might want a promotion. You could still miss a promotion because, the boss's brother or whatever wants a job or whatever, right? I mean, you could get passive for something that has nothing to do with your work, nothing to do with how much time and effort you put in. And it's like those things, because they're not in your control, focusing on them as a determination of worth is a total fallacy, because then if it doesn't work out, you think you failed, but you didn't fail. It just didn't work out, right? The circumstances were out of your control and something happened. But we act as if, that if that determines our worth, we're acting as if somehow that's in our control when it's not. And that's the mistake people are making. And that's the problem. What is in your control is the things you do, right? The choices you make and how you want to live your life. And I think that sort of thinking, though, is probably where we all struggle, because it's like we're acting as if, we're defined, or our values defined by stuff that really, we have no control over, where our values should be defined by our agency, by our doing, by our acting in the world. And really, this is the thing I think that, probably most people do struggle with, because it's, you see it all the time with, in the workplace and everything else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the stories of the people who never give up. Like what
Yeah.
I was just reminded of was the movie Founder, the story of Ray Kroc from McDonald's. How like when he was, I forget exactly, but he was like on the site of the McDonald's, and he was like, "Come on, just this once." Like he's tried again and again and again and again and again. And he's like, "Come on, just this once, work." And like, you hear the story of Colonel Sanders. He was in his 60s or 70s when he finally got something that worked. And you hear the story of the woman who wrote the Harry Potter book. She was turned down time and time and time and time again, but she just kept on going. Like, I love the stories of the people who, it doesn't matter. No matter what, I'm just going to keep on doing it. I don't care if I never get there, but I'm going to do everything in my power to get there. And I love that stuff.
Well, I like that too, though, because it's also like, those are the types of situations where that, like, it's easy to tell that if the person didn't keep doing it, didn't keep going, they would absolutely regret that later. And that would be worse than failing. That's worse than anything else. And I think that's an important thing to think about too, is like, what would I regret not doing? What would I regret having not, what, I mean, and it can be anything, like, not having a better relationship with someone, or not spending more time, whatever. It doesn't have to just be like goal oriented, but thinking that way too can be very sort of eye-opening in terms of our actual values and what matters to us. Because when you think of it that way, I think it's important, if I didn't do this, would I regret it later, even if I failed, even if it didn't work, would I still be happy that I at least tried? And I think, it's important, because, if we just keep trying and persist, like you said, something usually does work out. That is true. Or we find ways to adjust it or adapt it, because sometimes those failures also give us insight into, this is a good idea, but it's not working because of X, Y, and Z or whatever. And I think that's, it's a good point. Yeah. It's tough though.
And what you say about regrets, like, we all have to remember we're going to die. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, granted, whatever you think, maybe there's rebirth or whatever, but for the most part, if there's not, we may only have this one turn at it, this one shot. So like, we're all going to die. And as we're like, you have to imagine as you're laying there, either in the hospital, in your home, wherever it is, and your time is up. All your time on earth is up. Did you do what was valuable? Did you live a valuable life? And if you're not doing that, you got to start putting in the time, like today. And this is the big thing. It's not something where you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it tomorrow or next week or anything. It needs to be today, and it needs to be something small, 5 minutes, but do that 5 minutes every day.
Yeah, you have to put it in. I think, and it's recognizing that you have value, that you have this ability to create whatever you want. But again, you have to do it. And then imagining, really, really thinking through, like, and I think that's also a good exercise, like to write down or something. What would I regret not doing in my life? List 2 things, 5 things, 10, and keep increasing it, right? Like, if I was on my deathbed now, what would I regret not doing? What would I really be upset about? Would it be not getting a certain car or TV? I doubt it. Those kind of things, at the end of the day, yeah, they're nice to have, but they don't really matter in terms of like regrets. I can't imagine anybody regretting that. I mean, maybe like, I don't know, in some cases, but so it's like thinking that way, I think, can give us a really clear direction too on what values matter and what really matters to us. And then doing the things that matter really does increase our sense of value, I think, because we're also seeing our value realized by doing something that we care about and that we love, not just trying to be validated by things outside of us.
Yeah, that's another really good exercise. I'm gonna do that too. If I, yeah, because that's another fallacy, is thinking that, our deathbed is so far off. Like, we have to
Yeah.
stop acting like we've got 1,000 years to live. I think that was Marcus Aurelius who said that, because we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, we don't have all the time in the world, but it's often easy to feel like we have a lot of time, right? Trick ourselves. And at the same time, you don't want to be so panicked about it. Like, I guess can go both ways, but yeah, reminding ourselves of that, like, look, this all ends. So, just collecting stuff doesn't do you anything. You can't take it with you. I don't know. This isn't like, I mean, even the pharaohs, they dumped stuff with them, but that didn't matter, in the end of the day. So yeah, if you can't take it with you, you got to enjoy it now. You got to use it now. And I think the best way to look at that is, what should I do that's going to make sure that I don't regret anything later? And that's a valuable life because it's your life.
Yeah. So, I guess in summary, um,
In summation,
you're more valuable than you think. You have to remind yourself of that. And if you don't feel that right now, you have to look at your life. And I would say definitely the relationships, be it relationships with people, with animals, with plants. Like, those are the things, at least for me, that make it really, really clear that I have value.
I think that's true for a lot of people. Yeah, seeing our real impact in the world with other living entities is important because it's like a verified relationship, right? Where we're important to something else, right? It's survival. And that, makes sense in a very clear way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say too, I think, as, as self-aware creatures, I think we need to remind ourselves too all the time that, look, we are potential, we are the value creators, and that means that we are in ourselves valuable because we are the standard of value. We're the ones that determine value. So don't get caught in the mistake of flipping that and allowing things to assign value to you when you're the one that should be assigning value. I think that's crucial to remind yourself that, that we are basically limitless value because we're limitless potential. And then finding out the hard part is then finding out what things are right for you. But your value, like you said, is affirmed through your relationships and through your being in the world. I think that's the important part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the first most important thing is just recognizing the fallacy of the thought, I'm not valuable. Like, recognizing that thought is wrong. It may feel that way, it may seem that way, but it's wrong. And then investigating that and actually seeing where you do have value. And, if you need to, reach out to a counselor, reach out to, if things are bad, suicide prevention hotline, but like, recognizing that you have value inherently. It's a truth. You have value.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that too, that's nice about that is, that recognizing and trying to explore it, it is hard sometimes, but things always, your life gets better and afterwards by doing that, by going through the work and putting the work in, it gets better. And that's always true, but it's always the hardest part is starting the process, right? Of making it better and of asserting your value. And I think that's important as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I know this weekend I'm definitely going to be journaling a bit. I'm going to be writing down 100 reasons that I'm valuable, and also I'm going to be investigating, if I was on my deathbed today, what would I regret? Definitely.
Yeah, I'm going to try and come up with, I think, 10 things that I would regret. And that's what I'm going to try and focus on, is if I can come up with 10. both, like, and try and really think that through, because I think that'll be a difficult one. It'll be interesting.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we're good. Right?
Fantastic. Yeah.
All right.
Episode 41. We're 11 away from 52 of the Existential Stoic Podcast. Guys, listen to us on all of the podcast platforms. Also, you can watch our videos on YouTube at the Existential Stoic Podcast YouTube channel. I'm Randy. That's my buddy Danny. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next week.